we'll move swiftly on to Q&A. Matt, I think you're still sharing your screen there.
Okay, Pete, I'll sort that now. Sorry.
Unless it's just on my one, but that's not a problem. It was quite interesting with the when I introduced Meirav and that presentation. It did bring a lot of empathy from the audience with regard to the situation that operational firefighters will find themselves in, the challenge between personal safety and getting the job done. And there are a couple of questions actually that are specifically directed to Meirav, and if I could maybe ask those just to get the ball rolling. So this question comes from Samhar, and it's what modification requirements did you do or add to the training to emphasize to the firefighters about their own safety?
Well, as I said, every day, every week, we have a training made in the station, and the security matters is always the starting point. So it means once we start the day or the training, the first thing that we do is talk about those first security measurements that need to be taken once you go out to the fire. They know the measurements, they know what they have to do. And once you ask them, they know it. And we talk about it time after time. Every time we inquire the fires and we inquire what they did at the fire, the issue of security comes up. And it's not something they don't know. And we try throughout those techniques, as I said, to make it something, a part of them. But again, eventually, once you front the fire, things go different. But we do everything without our power to bring them home safety.
Mm-hmm. There's a second question that's come in from John Lang in relation to the firefighters who went into the incident. Was there any formal debrief following the incident or a review, or was there any discipline action taken against the firefighters?
So in those 3 cases that I showed, the first 2, we do an inquiry after every fire, and mainly if there's people who lost their lives. And once the firefighters and their captain talked about the consideration and the evaluation they made once they got into the fire, trying to understand that that's what needed to be done. If we wanted to save those children, those people, we needed to run into the fire. So we do talk about it, we do inquire it. There were other cases where discipline action were caught once there wasn't a water line, once they went in without their partners. On those 2 cases, the evaluation that they showed prior to going into the fire made us understand that in order to give the best way to deal with the fire was to go in. So there was no discipline action on those 2 cases. In many other cases, there were discipline action taken, of course.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got a question for Matt come in from Terry Johnson. How do you see the role of incident safety officer? Is it often overlooked or undervalued? And will the role be replaced by the target building softening teams due to skill level enhancement?
Yeah, hi Terry, thanks for the question. Yeah, the safety officer role will be taken over by the building softening team, certainly speaking from my experience and the procedure in Manchester, Terry, because they have got the additional skills. They're not stood there now with a whistle just looking at a building moving. They have monitoring devices for that. So as they rocked up to the incident and spoke to the officer in charge, it's probably something I missed off my presentation, that part of it we would then be safety officers after the initial assessment is done. So it takes away, again, the stood there in the middle of the night watching a building, deciding whether it's moving or not. We've now got the equipment that we can deploy onto that building and the skills to monitor it properly. So yeah, in answer to your question, we would use that once the initial activities of the TIU, target building softening team, have been done. The officer in charge could always implement safety officers prior to our arrival, but we'd take over that role once we're on the incident ground.
Thanks very much, Matt. I do have both Des and Adam still online, and I'll come back because I do have a question that's come in from the audience for Adam. But just for Matt and for Meirav, I'd actually jotted some notes down myself, and my background, I used to work actually with Des in the Berkshire Fire Service, and the incident that I mentioned earlier in my opening, I was actually the firefighter that was seriously injured. And one of the things we used to do in training was actually do a lot of improvisation with equipment. Now, that wasn't related to that incident, but certainly, we would make rafts with airbags and ladders and salvage sheets. We would use roof ladders as hook ladders, and we'd use equipment probably for not what it was designed for, but it was all part of developing the skill and competence and confidence of the operational firefighters. I'm just wondering from Meirav's perspective, is that type of training custom and practice or not taken on board? And for Matt, to answer after that, do you see any value with that as part of the building and softening process? So maybe Meirav, if you could comment on that.
Well, we during our training at the academy and at the station, we try to build them the lesson to follow in order to give to each case or each dilemma or each fire the right way to go into the fire. In order for them to get to there, and we believe that knowing the techniques, knowing what you have to do with the equipment you have, and there are several trucks fire that we can take out to the fires, and to know exactly what we're supposed to, and not to improvise. That's the best way to fight the fire. But improvisation is always something that comes out once you confront the fire. And we saw many fires that firefighters had to improvise in order to get into the people, in order to stop the fire. And once we go back to the station, we inquire it, we try to learn it. And I can say that many times we learn things from those improvisations. And yes, we take them into the lesson, we take them into academy, and we try to build the right technique using those improvisations, because they helped us deal with the fire. But mostly we try to teach them, go by the technique. Only if there's no option to use the technique you learn, improvise with the equipment, improvise with yourself. But we try and we train them to work automatically by the technique. We believe that in that way they can act faster and sometimes better than to improvise and use improvisations.
Okay, thank you. And Matt, any observations or comments?
Yeah, I remember those days using improvised ladders fondly, Pete. I really do. Building rafts and putting up. When we first got PPVs in Manchester, we built a raft out of some soft suction, and we put a salvage sheet on it, and then we put a PPV on it, and we shot it across a reservoir in Manchester, and it sunk. That got us in a lot of trouble. The great thing with improvised training is it gets the guys thinking. And I was recently doing a trench rescue course in Pakistan, and they had no structural rescue struts which come across the trench. And I said, listen guys, what have you got? What have you got on the fire ground which we can put in the trench to stop it falling in on everyone else? And they came up with something. In the end, we just got a digger and we put the bucket down and held the side of the trench over. Using improvised training is fantastic, and I always use it in my training. And where it really helps with target building softening, I always had this, not concern, but it was always in the back of my mind that when we turn up with all this specialist equipment, we're kind of alienating ourselves from the rest of the crews. So what I used to do is take all my crews round to the stations that surrounded the technical rescue units in Manchester and show them the equipment, and then say, okay, if you haven't got this, for instance, you haven't got paratexturin, you can use cribbing, which is basically just 4x4, which you can find on any building site. And that's how you could crib a building stack up if you were airlifting some obstruction off someone who's trapped. So I don't think we should ever lose focus on improvising, because when we need to improvise, we need to know how to use equipment that isn't designed for that, as long as it's safe. We have all this fantastic equipment now, but we never used to take it overseas with us in the early days. I remember my first earthquake in Turkey. we got over there and we'd been training with all the equipment we've got back in the UK, and we had none of it when we got to Turkey, and we had to improvise. And lessons learned off that were critical in future development of equipment. And yeah, we use that all the time, and we should never lose focus with that training skill for our recruits, because it's precious.
Yeah, no, totally agree on that one. I've got a question for Adam. I'm very aware that we need to move on to the networking and exhibition session, but we've had a question that came from David Morgan, and is in relation to on the database, through the incident analysis, will details of materials that have had certification, the types of certification which have failed, be added to the database?
So that's an interesting question. The information is gathered from other organisations. So a report is normally provided. That's the normal route of information being given. It's then processed if it has to, like, for example, redaction. But what the database is not about is forming opinions or anything like that. So if there's a report that has that information in there, or there's a link in the resources of interest section that links to an organisation that's providing its own information that may have information about products, then yes, but the IFE isn't going to put it up there if it's not come from the information specifically related to an incident. Does that make sense? So we're not going to form. It's not about us as an organisation forming opinions. It's about sharing information that is out there. Primarily reports, but also links to other, academic research, for example, or other organisations, other, reputable organisations that have got research information or data or whatever. So, we wouldn't get involved in debates around, for example, certain manufacturers of insulating materials, which, everyone would be aware of in the Grenfell inquiry, but we would, potentially put up the information where you can link to the Grenfell inquiry and find that information yourself. It's not for the IFE to form opinions. I mean, there is a section where research can be looked at, but it's not about that. So you'd find that information potentially if it's mentioned in the keyword in the report. If it's mentioned in the sort of the abstract, the information, the page introductory bit, then you will be able to find that in the keyword search. So, for example, if you typed in high rise, it should bring up all the high rise incidents. If you typed in polyurethane foam, same thing. Aluminium composite materials, same thing, and you would get incidents that relate to that. The benefit of that is really going to be demonstrated when we've got more data, more incidents up there, and on a global approach, to that useful. You're not going to get a true picture of how many, just for example, high-rise buildings that have caught fire around the world. You're not going to get a true reflective number of that if the information isn't put into the database. I hope that answers the question.
No, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. And I'd just like to say again, what a great piece of work you've done, and please do continue doing it. And for the audience globally, please feed back into the work that Adam's doing.
Yeah.
I'm very aware of the time now that we should be moving on to the networking and exhibition. Just before I hand back to Philip, I will say no more, but I just want to see if Des would like the opportunity to just make a couple of remarks before we move and hand over to Philip.
Thank you, Peter. I think for me, really is just to reflect on where I came from at the beginning, and it's something that it's a thread across all of the 4 presentations to all those firefighters, fire officers, control room staff, whatever your job is within the fire and rescue service. Take every opportunity to learn from every incident that you have the benefit to attend or be part of. Learn from those incidents, get involved with debriefs, and just as importantly, the wider work that people like Matt are doing, and Adam and our colleagues from the Israel Fire and Rescue Service. There's so much information out there on the internet There's no excuse. It's all about CPD, and it's all there for you. It's just led out there. It just needs you to access it. Thank you very much, Peter.
No problem. I'll just actually add to that, Des, because it just sparked another thought that, as well as the operational side, I've worked on operations and on the design, and I think the fire engineering community and the architectural community, etc., do need to pay attention and focus and make sure the buildings are safe by design to ensure that all people are safe, and importantly, the responders in the event of a disaster. And at this point now, I'd just like to hand back over to Philip to close out the session.